Welcome to another episode of the Road Radio USA Proactive Prevention Podcast, where we explore the challenges impacting our communities and sharing stories of hope, resilience, and transformation. I'm Jimbo in stereo, and today we have an incredibly powerful conversation lined up for you. Join us today is Taylor Falk, a certified recovery specialist and family recovery specialist from West Branch Drug and Alcohol Commission. Not only is Taylor a professional dedicated to helping others, but he's also someone with a deeply personal connection to the journey of recovery himself. He's walked the road himself, and now he uses those experiences to guide others, especially families and young people, towards healthier, drug-free lives. In today's episode, we'll hear Taylor's inspiring recovery story and gain insight into how his past fuels his mission today. We'll discuss the role of prevention, the importance of family support, and practical strategies that parents, educators, and community members can use to help steer young people away from substance abuse. This episode is filled with hard truths, hope, and tools you can use to make a difference in the lives of young people all around you. Welcome. Can you share your recovery story with us and tell us how it shaped your passion for helping others, and especially young people, avoid the same struggles you faced?
Sure. So, I'll try to keep this condensed because obviously, I've had almost a decade of actively using drugs and alcohol under my belt. But
what kind of drugs, by the way?
Basically everything. I was a garbage can, but I would say that my primary substances of choice were heroin and crack cocaine. They would be the primary ones. But okay. I mean, any illicit street narcotic that you could probably think of, I had probably tried at one time or another. So I've had exposure to many different substances.
Now, is that the kind of stuff kids are using these days, would you say, as a person that you do in your work? Yeah, so as far as the harder street narcotics, there is some sporadic use through those youth years per se, but I would say mostly adults are using them now. When we talk about marijuana and alcohol, I think those are still the two predominant substances being used by youth, especially now marijuana, because it is legal. So I think the availability of it and just the prevalence of it has really kind of kept it as, with alcohol, the two main substances that we really see in the youth populations. So marijuana is in fact legal in Pennsylvania now, huh?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Yep. So, yeah, well, as far as you can obtain your medical card, and there is many diagnoses and many different criterias that make getting the medical marijuana card fairly easy. I do know there's a little bit of a process in terms of, the referral to the doctors that actually prescribe those cards, but I would say that very much so in the state of Pennsylvania, it would not be hard to obtain a medical marijuana card.
Okay. And what other kind of drugs were you going to say?
I had some brief really where my heroin addiction kicked off at would be prescription painkillers. I had used those for a couple of years prior before I was introduced to heroin. I would say they were definitely the gateway that led me to heroin, and I was also using, powder cocaine. I've tried methamphetamines, basically any kind of pharmaceutical medication you could think of, along with, the marijuanas, the alcohols, and the Xanax and other benzos. So, I've had a lot of exposure to those things, but yeah, but always the primary substances that always seem to really drag me beneath the water were heroin and crack cocaine.
Now, what age would you say this all began?
So, I truly think, I'm not sure. It's hard to speculate. Rather, I was, born an addict or had a different kind of brain wiring. which there are some studies on, and there is some speculation there that are we born addicts? Or is it more of an environmental progressive thing as we go on? I can't really say what I was. I do know, looking back, I'm pretty sure from day one, seeing how my peers when we were young drink, I always drank and used substances much different than my peers.
Okay.
So I definitely think there was some kind of wiring issue there from the get-go.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it progressed, to the point that it kind of was a complete overhaul of my life. And once it kind of ran off the rails, it was really hard to get it back on track.
Okay. So, what's the age, would you say?
Yeah,
Would you say you were 12?
I was probably closer to 15 when I started, experimenting.
Okay.
There was nothing full-blown there yet.
Okay.
I experimented with marijuana and alcohol throughout my high school years. So, 15 through 17.
Okay.
It was mostly primarily alcohol at that point.
Okay.
I started to, I guess, experiment with harder street narcotics when I went to college, so 18-ish.
Okay.
And I guess if we had to circle it on a calendar, a calendar year, when I truly think that my using looked very habitual or chronic, it was probably in that 19 to 20-year-old ballpark.
Really?
And that lasted until I was about 25. So yeah, I basically, the writing was on the wall by the time I was 19-ish, that was the point that I was using alcohol and drugs on a daily basis, 24/7, 365.
Wow.
So.
Okay. Now tell me about your upbringing. What school did you go to and things like that around here?
Yeah, I went to Hughesville High School.
Hughesville, huh?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Hughesville, and you know what? I had a phenomenal upbringing.
Rural school. Huh?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I had a phenomenal upbringing. There was nothing, honestly, looking at it, I probably didn't give off very much red flags, because my parents were together at the time. I had a very stable household. My parents are still happily married.
Okay.
My parents didn't ever really drink. I know for a fact they didn't use any drugs. So it was just not a part of our lives. And I think we think that, a lot of substance use disorder comes from the environmental setting, you seeing their parents using, which that is factual, right? But there is a big portion of us who suffer from the substance use disorder that come from very normal childhoods, have no traumatic events in their life, nothing that would really ring the bells to say that, okay, by the time they're 18 they're going to be this. So I mean, like I said, there was nothing that my parents did wrong at all. I just kind of veered off the path and stayed there, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, back to your youth. Tell me more about the friends you hung around. What were they like at Hughesville?
You know what? Honestly, a lot of my friends, I would definitely say I was the wild one of the bunch.
Were you?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say I was a black sheep by any means. But a lot of my friends were, I grew up playing sports. I love sports. Sports were my first love. So a lot of my friends were, just the individuals I would play sports with.
Okay.
And you know what? Looking at it now, they all did great in school. They did better than me in school. So, it wasn't like I was hanging around with, a bad crowd. I would like to think that a lot of those kids that I grew up with were, good students, good human beings that, it wasn't the case of I got in with the wrong crowd by any means. I think I was I was always the outlier of the crowd, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about some of the people specifically. Do you know any Forsmans, or do you know any Forsman's, I guess, is the one because that's my family there.
Yeah, so like DJ would have been 2 years younger than me.
Oh, he would have been, okay.
Yeah, DJ was 2 years younger than me. And I played football with him. Okay. So he would have been on the football team my senior year.
Okay. Okay, just wondering.
Yep,
I didn't know. So just curious.
I definitely
know
for sure.
So was there a specific moment in your youth, positive or negative, that you can think led to you the way you are today? How can young people make better choices early on? I mean, that's basically where we're at right now. So
yeah, and
what happened that you're a recovery specialist today? Whatever happened in your life?
Yeah, so as far as the youth goes, I don't think there was any like major red flag or causation of why I decided to go the route I did. I would say the best advice I could give would be that
was there a car crash?
No.
Was there a death in school?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Okay. Like I said, there was just nothing to really sound off the alarms. And the only advice, and it's very sound advice that I can give, because I speak at a lot of high schools, so I do have exposure in front of students, and I always try telling them that just because there isn't something major going on, right? Mm-hmm. And just because you're not exposed to at home, and just because your friends aren't doing it, and just because you don't have any type of substance use disorder running through your family tree, doesn't make you, any less prone to potentially falling into the disease like addiction. And how I explain it to them, the minute we first introduce that liquid alcohol into our system, or we, smoke the marijuana or whatever we do to ingest anything, it's a true game of Russian roulette. We just don't know if that's going to set off any kind of dominoes that potentially might, really veer us off that track. So that's always the advice I give, because I can only come from a place of personal experience where, like I said, there's nothing traumatic that happened to me. There was nothing that would have alarmed anybody. So I try to really drive that point home that it's a true gamble. Once you start introducing and once you start experimenting with these things, there's no guarantee that you're going to be susceptible to the disease of addiction.
Okay. You're familiar with Road Radio USA? Have you ever seen the show before?
I don't believe so.
No, we need to get you to come see a show. Okay. So it's been around now for 30 years.
Wow, 30 years.
And I wouldn't be surprised you hadn't seen it in the show in the school where you went to, Hughesville. So
I might have at one point.
I know DJ saw it. So
okay.
Anyway, that being said, so what strategies do you recommend for schools and community programs like Road Radio USA to help prevent youth substance abuse and addiction?
It's a pretty, honestly, I look at it, it's a simple formula, right? It's and I'm not saying this is foolproof by any means, or this is going to be massively effective across the board, nation to nation, state to state.
Right.
But we have to get youth in front of folks that have actually suffered from this thing. The days of the dare, the fried egg, the days of somebody coming in that has not a clue what drug addiction is, hammering home some points from a book. First of all, that would never keep my attention. Looking back, if I was 15 and I heard something like that, it's in one ear out the other. The only way you can truly connect to youth is common ground. And there has to be that level of almost aura from you. And that's what I found, because I do work with youth, and it's all about the compatibility. Youth, and what I found is, I think we get too timid in what we want to share or what kind of message we want to get across. The day and age of when I was 13 and 14, I'll tell you what, 10-year-olds knew more now than I knew at 18. They're exposed to more now. They can handle the raw, gritty truths. And really withholding any major details or severity of how bad this thing gets does them a major disservice.
I agree.
So we need to be real, raw, and gritty with the youth, because I think they respect that too. I mean, as a youth, as if, 12, 13, 14-year-old, we kind of like that mystique, right? We like hearing, there has to be something that really catches the attention when you're that young. And the only way to catch your attention is getting folks that have struggled with this thing, have made it out the other side, and share their, personal experience with them.
Okay, that kind of leads to my next question, and that is, as a recovery specialist, how do you help families rebuild trust and communication after substance abuse has disrupted their lives? How can prevention programs support this effort? That kind of leads right into that question. So my next question after that is, how can parents and teachers approach conversations about drugs and alcohol with young people in a way that resonates with them? So go ahead with that.
Yeah, that is the age-old question, right?
Right.
Because so for one, kids are not going to listen to their parents in general. And looking back, it's just, and it kind of goes why I think what we do is unique. I could say the same thing as parent, but as long as it's not coming out of parent's mouth, the kid will listen. Right. So there's always going to be that pushback from a parental figure or anything like that, a caregiver for a child. I think that it's tough. It's a tough question because there is no actual blueprint on how to approach this. I think it's variable dependent. I think it's situation dependent. And you kind of have to know how the kid responds in general, or how do you get their attention in the first place. So I would love to sit here and say that the teachers and the parents, now I understand they have to address this issue, right? Because they would obviously be doing a disservice if they didn't bring it up or talk about it.
Right.
But I don't think a parent or a teacher is the right person to have that conversation. So I think the question the answer more lies in what person can you get in front of that child to hopefully, garner their attention.
Right.
More so than trying to give teachers and parents this, ABC instructional manual on how to approach these things. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think it's going to be effective. So it's finding the right people to get in front of the kids is where I think, the only hope lies.
And you don't think the right people is police or doctors, or you don't think that?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, well, I can't say that. Let me backtrack. If the police or the doctor was in recovery, sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. And there are police officers, there are individuals that work in fire departments and hospitals and all these, really mainstream professions and jobs that are in recovery.
Okay.
So yeah, they would be suitable,
Okay.
suitable options, but it truly comes back around to we have to get people that have lived experience in front of these kids.
Okay.
For sure.
Right. I agree with you there. So now what can communities do beyond education programs to create a safer, healthier environment for youth, free from the pressures of substance abuse?
Simple activities.
Okay.
And I think I think there's a lot of good organizations coming out of here, but that's always going to be an issue in smaller populated areas, right? What are options to fill up idle time for kids, right?
Okay.
That is positive and meaningful. That's really the only thing because adults too, we are going to fill up our time. Either we fill up our time with something that's negative or we fill it up with something that's positive. And the unfortunate part, unless there's a lot of outlets or avenues to kind of shuttle these kids into, after school programs and activities and sports, then you kind of leave it to, it's kind of turns into the wild, wild west then. Yeah. And the kids kind of open up to interpretation of what they want to do with their free time. So I think it's finding a way that, community can start up either nonprofits or these programs that allow kids to potentially, indulge themselves in these good positive habits, good positive lifestyle. And I think once they get into that, not that they veer off, but I definitely think that you can kind of keep them tamed a little bit more if they're already on the right path.
Right.
And, if they do slip off, pull them back in, opposed to, trying to, run out and try to wrangle 50 running around kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it's just, I think it's pertinent that there are activities and, organizations in place to give these kids an outlet.
Good luck with that, too. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's sad to say that, but it's true,
Very much
sad
so.
to say that.
Yep.
So, now, what message of hope and practical advice would you share with young people and families who might be struggling or worried about substance abuse? This is, what do you do?
So, I think there's, especially for myself, being a new parent and knowing my background, I think there's always going to be, as a good parent, I think there's always going to be that fear of your kid wandering that path, right? Especially knowing what I know and what I've experienced. That's probably one of the worst things I could feasibly think of right now as we sit, is that my boy followed my steps and basically lived the same life that I did in active addiction, right? Mm-hmm. So I think naturally that really, really scares parents, rightfully so. But I think what we have to give to them in terms of, maybe just, giving them a little bit of, support, is that there are a lot of good options that if the student or the child decides to go down that kind of path of drugs or alcohol, that there's a lot of good, meetings, there's a lot of good fellowships, there's a lot of good outpatient providers that can provide support and assistance for them. And just knowing that, and I think it's too just knowing, and I think I think we're continuing to do a really good job on stigma.
Okay.
Before, families would keep it very, very hush-hush that they got, alcoholics and substance users in their family. But now with kind of the advent of, the 21st century, obviously there's still stigma, but I think a lot of people at least now know that they're not alone. A lot of parents know other parents that have kids that struggle with this or have died from this.
Right.
So I just think that just knowing that there is something out there, mm-hmm. and there is a way of hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what I always try to portray in terms of hope to parents or family, or even, kids or adults that are, actively struggling with addiction, is that there is hope.
Right.
There is hope at the end of the day. It might look super, super dark and cloudy right now. But if you do the necessary things, and I think if you check off certain boxes, not to say that it turns into rainbows and glitter in one day, right?
Right.
But you can really start, pushing the needle in the direction of, kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But it's a lot of work that's involved in that. It's going to boil down to how willing are you, are you ready for change in the first place, So that's always what I try to give to parents, is that, there is, services and everything like that available for them.
Okay. Sure. Now listen, we've had a really good discussion here, but you're a specialist. Mm-hmm. What would you think you'd like to offer to today's interview that we haven't talked about really, that you want to offer more? Can you think of anything else?
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess just to chime in, because I'm pretty passionate about it, and I think this is one area of recovery that still has a lot of stigma, is Narcan, for sure.
Narcan?
Yeah, and
okay.
I'm a huge advocate of it. It's a medication that reverses opioid overdoses.
Okay.
You see the stigma, you see the the backlash on social media is that insulin isn't free, but Narcan's free, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you got to pay for Narcan. They did make it over the counter. You can purchase it at Target now, and some other pharmacies, but I always try to at least insert that, because what I've seen, I know for a fact Narcan saves lives.
Okay.
I know a couple people that are very close to me that have been Narcan multiple times and live extraordinarily successful lives to this day.
Okay.
And without the availability of Narcan, they would have never been able to live up to their potential.
Okay.
So I always like to just interject and insert that, because that is definitely still the one area of substance use that has a lot of stigma surrounding it. We give it away for free every month. And I know for a fact that it only benefits communities. And I don't think it should be looked at as any other kind of medication, because at the end of the day, everybody deserves to live.
Okay.
Everybody deserves the third, the fourth, the 38th chance.
Sure.
And the only way someone can get clean is if they're breathing.
Right.
And they're alive.
Now, that's the West Branch Drug and Alcohol Abuse Commission.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, tell me more about how the fentanyl issue is working with that.
Yeah, so that was the main reason for trying to really push Narcan into the community, and this was a state nationwide objective. We at that time, with fentanyl really hitting the streets hard, legislation was trying to pump as much Narcan into the community as possible, just because of how lethal fentanyl can be at very minute doses. So I do think, though, and this is anecdotal, and I mean, there is some nationwide studies to back this up. There's still a high prevalence for fentanyl, but the most popular, alcohol, I think, will always be the most popular substance in America. Easily available. I think it's not looked down upon as if you were to put a needle in your arm or pipe in your mouth, right? But I have seen the downshift in fentanyl, and methamphetamines have been basically the king player on the street since COVID. And that, as far as illicit narcotics go, that is definitely the most popular drug probably nationwide currently. It's very strong. It's very cheap. It lasts very long. And it used to be only really more of a rural kind of drug, but now we're seeing it in a lot of urban areas. So I think, not that we have addressed the fentanyl issue, because I still think there is some work to be done there.
Okay.
But I think the main objective, or the frontline battle we need to be waging, is definitely on methamphetamines.
Okay.
For sure, bar none.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yep. Thanks for listening to the Proactive Prevention Podcast. Until next time, this is Jimbo in stereo.